วัสดีค่ะ Welcome to ASEAN Talks on ASEAN TV. I am Tulip Naksomphop, your host in this episode. And today we will talk about the latest book that just published in December 2011 called Thai and American Communication Behavior, a comparison of elephants and eagles. And we have the author with us today. There are 4 authors, but we got 2 of them on the show today. We got Dr. Grisada Tangchaisak and Dr. Thomas Joel Knudsen. สวัสดีค่ะ First of all, thank you very much to get on the show with me today.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
I have to, first of all, before we go any further, I have to admit first that I haven't finished the book yet. But I went through probably 1/4 of the book already, and it's really interesting, a lot of things in here. When they talk about communication behavior, I consider myself a person very much in communication theory and all that stuff. But this is a lot in culture too.
The book is based on the relationship, really, between cultural values and the way in which communication differs. The way people communicate. Sorry, English is my first language. But the cultural values of Thais and Americans, as you know, having lived in both places, are quite distant. And it produces different kinds of communication behavior.
So what is the initial purposes of writing this book?
Yeah, Dr. Knudsen here was in Thailand like many years ago. The first time he was in Thailand was about 20 years ago, right? And he came here like a couple times each year since then. And he had a lot of experience communicating with people. Oh, I have to tell you, first of all, this is about interpersonal communication rather than mass communication.
Okay.
So we look at the communication between people, and culture become like one of the greatest barrier which obstruct the way people talk to each other, because we don't understand. When we communicate with other people, we do it based on our own assumption or presumption about the world. So that comes the idea of writing a book between Thai and American, because he is American here and we are Thai. So we can share some experience and the theories as well, not just only experience. We want it to be a bit academic. So we based on lots of communication theories.
So you're saying that cultural itself actually play a really big part of how people approach communication, or how to they analyze the communication.
It plays a very big role. Just a brief comparison between Thai culture and American cultural values, for example. The Thai cultural value, the #1 Thai cultural value, social harmony. And that's not opinion. That's from Suntari Komin and many other Thai professors. Contrast that with the #1 American cultural value, which is achievement, measured by materialism. So immediately, just with those 2 things, you can see the production of different kinds of communication behavior.
But we can see that Thai, I would say Thai government, but we change government so often. But we can see we have a really long, pretty friendly relationship with U.S. government. But that's just on the international politics level.
That's more, as you say, more of an international political situation. And sometimes I have to remind my American colleagues that Thailand has been around for 5,000 years. They must be doing something right compared to the relatively brief time America has been around.
Well, but don't you think that the age is, just because America born later doesn't mean they're doing something more or less wrong, right?
No, it doesn't. Not at all. And I don't mean to suggest that. I think my country's been pretty successful. I'm a patriot. But sometimes perhaps we become a bit too aggressive. And I don't mean politically. I mean interpersonally. For example, when my Thai students come to the United States, I give them 2 words of advice. Speak up.
Right.
When my American students come to Thailand to study, 2 words of advice. Shut up.
Oh, okay.
You see the distinction?
Yes. Yeah, I think in the book you said big difference between Asian and Western is the common. I think it's your own saying. It said it's commonality among the variables. It's just so small. and it's the way they approach, Thai people approach communication like holistic way, and American approach the communication, they tend to classify things in parts. Can you elaborate that a little more?
It's about the way we look at the world. So we come to the term values here. Because when Thai people look at the world in one way, and Americans look at it in a certain way, different ways. Like American like to analyze, that is to separate in parts and look at each part. But Thai will look at the whole picture. They will not focus more on the details. Okay, so when someone with these different kinds of worldview come together, they may find it difficult to get through to each other. So that's why we have to look at the values of people.
So what is the upside or the downside of looking at things as a whole picture or just picking things in details?
You know, okay, in communication theories, two things must go together when we communicate, the content and relationship. There are two dimensions. The American focus on content. So they talk about the things they want to talk, but Thai would focus more on relationship. So,
really?
Right. So
like how other people will receive the message?
Yeah.
For example, many American business people will come here to Thailand first day. And they will come, let's say, I'm going to try to sell you something. And I'll spend my time saying, here's my catalog, take a look at it. These are all the important things.
Right.
I'll be back, you decide, bye-bye. I have 4 more appointments. In Thailand, that's incredibly rude because there's never any relationship built.
Right.
Contrast that, you come as a Thai business person to the United States to sell me something. And you talk about my family, and you talk about your family, and you talk about the museums and the restaurants and the American culture.
We buy you a cup of coffee.
Yeah, let's chat a little bit.
And dinner.
And the American says, what's going on? Time is money. Because more focused on content.
Right.
So these issues are never really important until people get together, as Dr. Krista says, is intercultural communication. And that's what this book is about, to try to help both sides understand how to build a common culture, even though we are quite different, that will enable us to understand each other and be productive and happy in our relationship.
You said earlier that you have been studying about this subject for 15 years, over 15 years. Is it getting any closer between Thai and American culture throughout these 15 years? I mean, the world getting smaller with all this communication and technology.
I can tell you this. Thailand changed my life for good forever.
Okay.
Simple as that. And it's because of a realization of the importance of relationships. I was quite aggressive before I came to the United States. Before I came to Thailand, before I came to Thailand. And now I find myself being more productive and more relaxed. Sometimes my American colleagues, when I return from Thailand, they say, oh, it takes you a long time to get back to normal. I said, what do you mean? They said, you're too quiet, you're too relaxed. I said, what's wrong with that?
So you're saying that Thai working culture is more relaxed?
Yeah. We are more relaxed, and we look at social harmony or relationship before the job. So that's why many people got upset about Thai ways of working. But that's a culture. That's the way things are. So what we have to do is to learn. Like, oh, people do it this way, so we have to do it that way. But I can tell you, Thai culture is changing as well. In the past, we had sort of normal life in agricultural society. But now we improve a lot. We have developed it.
Industrialized.
Right. And once we developed it, we adopt a lot of materialistic worldview. So I would say people in Bangkok are more or less relational oriented, but more job oriented than before. So we getting towards, like Thai is here on the relationship extreme. We are moving towards the job extreme. And American is in the job extreme. And they're moving towards the relationship extreme.
Can we say this is not just Probably not the whole country. Maybe it's the characteristic of the metropolitan city.
Well, there have been people who have said frequently that there are two Thailands, Bangkok and the rest of the country.
Okay.
And to a certain extent, I think that's true. But as Dr. Krista pointed out, many times people confuse Westernization or Americanization with modernization. And if you walk the streets of Bangkok, you see a marvelously modern, beautiful city. But if you talk with people, the inherent traditional cultural values remain pretty much the same. Modern, but that doesn't mean they've adopted American values any more than if I buy a Toyota, I adopt Japanese values.
No, but modern, it's more like on the materialistic side.
I think there may be more to that. But again, it's the comparison. As Dr. Krista said, if you compare the two, they're quite different. They may be coming closer together, and I hope so. I hope so for my country's sake.
Well, but you cannot say that Americanism is not, what should I say, conservative.
Oh, I don't mean to say anything about the American political viewpoint. If you want to talk
politics,
I'm
not talking about politics.
Go to the embassy.
No, I'm not talking about politics. I'm talking about the way of life. There is also, it's not super clear-cut that the whole America will be super modernism.
That's right.
We cannot use the word to like typical people. That's too stereotypical.
Right.
So what we are talking here in this book is about generally, in general. And certainly there are some people who are not general.
Right.
Okay. so
in every culture.
Right. So we are talking about the majority, the way of life. Like, and we want to tell people to look from a different set of lens rather than looking through this lens forever. And we are trying to tell them, hey, look, there's this lens as well. So if you try to look at the world through this lens, you might get a better understanding of each other.
Okay. We're going to take a really short break and we'll come back and we will talk more about what's in this book and what else between the Thai and American culture. Besides the differences, is there any similarity? Not go anywhere.